In 1990, after dropping off of doing The Godfather Part 3, actress Winona Ryder handed director Francis Ford Coppola a script written by James V. Hart, an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula called, well, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Hi, I'm C.B. Smith, and we're going to be going over Dracula, both the movie and the book that's based on, along with some fun little historical tidbits along the way.
By the time Francis Ford Coppola's James V. Hart's Bram Stoker's Dracula came out, the famous book has been around for nearly 100 years, with adaptations aplenty, starting on stage technically a week before the book was even published. Stoker was a bit savvy in the world of stage play copyrights like that. The Count has gone through a slew of interpretations and reimaginings, some more faithful than others. So in comes this movie, whose title has the author's actual name in it to stand out from the rest as the Dracula book adaptation. So how does this movie start out?
From Transylvania arose a Romanian knight of the Sacred Order of the Dragon, known as Dracula.
Alright, let's get this Vlad the Impaler shit out of the way. If you don't want a history lesson, just skip at this time code here.
The movie begins with the origin of Vlad Tepes III of Wallachia, as he becomes the famous vampire Dracula, after coming home from the crusade in 1462, seeing his wife Elizabeta commit suicide. He is told her soul will be doomed to hell for killing herself. Vlad curses out to God and in full extra goth fashion stabs a cross and drinks the blood that comes out of it, as you do. The crusades that we think of, Christian knights marching into Jerusalem, ended roughly 100 years before the events shown in the movie, for a slew of reasons, one of which was the Black Death. Not many people willing to go crusading when about half of them are dead. What remained were a bunch of border clashes between the Ottoman Turks and Eastern Europe. Vlad Tepes III of Wallachia, otherwise known as Vlad the Impaler and Vlad Dracula, was an actual person, and for years there's been this belief that Bram Stoker based his vampire on him. Back in 1972, historians Raymond T. McNally and Radu R. Fleshkiw published In Search of Dracula, one of the first big English-language biographies made on Vlad.
So I mentioned Wallachia before, so just to clarify, Wallachia became part of Transylvania in the 1860s, 30 years before Dracula was published, and then Transylvania joined Romania after World War I, eventually being part of the Soviet Union until 1989 with the overthrow of the Soviet government.
In Search of Dracula was the big, publicized book that connected Vlad to the fictional Dracula, which would later be the inspiration to a documentary of the same name in 1975, further cementing the idea. While Fleshkiw would go on and write other books about Romanian history and Vlad not really connecting him to the fictional Dracula, he would team up with McNally and write other In Search of books. In Search of Frankenstein, connecting Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to the medieval barons of the same name. There is also In Search of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, connecting the Robert Stevenson book and character to William Brodie, a wealthy cabinet maker that was caught and sentenced to death for burglary and robbery in 1788. These never gained the popularity to their Dracula book. McNally would, in the 80s, also write another Dracula is really a historical figure book with Dracula Was a Woman, which was about Countess Elizabeth Bathory, a noble woman with a supposed body count challenging even Vlad.
But what I'm trying to say is that these guys, though decent historians when writing biographies on people, went well and beyond a gimmick, tying famous Victorian fictional characters to vaguely similar real-life comparisons.
In 1974, Richard Matheson of I Am Legend fame penned a script for what would become Bram Stoker's Dracula. No, this Bram Stoker's Dracula, which took inspiration from McNally and Fleshkiw and tied the vampire Dracula to the story of Vlad the Impaler, and even adding a lost love reincarnated into the story that would later be reused for this 1992 version. McNally and Fleshkiw can be credited to really legitimizing the idea that Vlad was a direct inspiration for Bram Stoker's creature, which brings us to the question, did Bram Stoker base his Dracula on Vlad the Impaler?
Yes, but no. Kinda. It's hard to explain.
Bram Stoker's original notes for writing Dracula were discovered in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I say discovered, but really it was just no one bothered to ask the curator of the museum "Hey, you got Bram's Dracula notes in there by any chance?" Until, again, McNally and Fleshcue, looking over old papers and pamphlets about our guy Vlad at the museum when an employee at the museum just casually asked if they would like to see the notes. Bram Stoker's original library card was also found for the London Library, so we also know which books he took out during the time of writing these notes. One of these books was an account of the principalities of Wallachia and Moldova by William Wilkinson, published in 1820. The book is not very detailed and even gets some parts wrong, but you can see its direct correlation in the finished novel. In the novel Dracula, Jonathan Harker, a real estate solicitor visiting Dracula's castle to finish the paperwork, selling Dracula property in Purefleet just outside of London. There is a scene where Jonathan is eating. Dracula tells the story of his family's lineage, beginning with the Norsemen coming down from Scandinavia and the Huns riding from the west. Later on, he tells of the Draculas, a family of warriors that fought against the Turks, where we get this part here. "When was redeemed that great shame of my nation, the shame of Kosovo, when the flags of the Wallach and the Magyar went down beneath the crescent? Who was it but one of my own race, who was Voivode, crossed the Danube, and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed. Woe was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk and brought the shame of slavery on them." This is a direct reference in Wilkinson's book. Beginning on page 17, we follow how the Draculas joined the Hungarians in fighting against the Turks in 1444. They were defeated. This first Dracula wanted to appear as an ally to the Turks by switching sides. That first Dracula was killed by the Hungarians and replaced by someone named Dan. He's only listed as Dan in Wilkinson's book. So Dan went and fought the Turks with the Hungarians, then lost at the Battle of Kosovo in Bulgaria. So another member of the Dracula family took over and crossed the Danube River, succeeded for a short time only to be pushed back. While in hiding in Hungary, his brother named Bladis took over Wallachia as a puppet state for the Turks. At the bottom of the page, Wilkinson wrote that Dracula in the Wallachian language means devil. The Wallachians were at that time, as they are at the present, used to give this as a surname to any person who rendered himself conspicuous, either by courage, cruel actions, or cunning. This is the last we hear of the Draculas in Wilkinson's book. Cross-referencing what is known about Vlad is that, yes, his father was killed by the Hungarians by trying to pull a double cross and was replaced by someone who was involved in the Battle of Kosovo. After that failed battle, another Dracula, Vlad, came to power only to then cross the Danube River and attacked a small force of Turks only to be driven back and replaced by his brother. Now going back to the novel Dracula, near the end of the story, while hunting for the vampire, Professor Abraham Van Helsing is talking with one of the other vampire hunters about having a colleague, Arminius, at the university, looking into the notes that Jonathan Harker wrote about his time at Dracula's castle. Helsing came back and said that he must indeed have been that Voivode Dracula, who won his name against the Turk over the Great River on the very frontier of Turkeyland. Further down, Helsing explains that the Draculas were a noble race of devil worshippers that gained their power through Satan.
So there you go. We have our direct link between Vlad the Impaler and our fictional Dracula, with even a character in the book flat out saying that, yes, this is our Dracula. Couple problems with that, though.
The name Vlad is never mentioned once in Wilkinson's book. Both Wilkinson and by extension Stoker call the Draculas a family of people as if it's like a noble house. Vlad's dad, Vlad II, Dragul, chose the name Dracul, meaning the dragon. The Order of the Dragon was a group of knights started by Sigismund of Luxembourg, King of Hungary, in an attempt to re-establish the glory of the Templar Knights, the bad guys from Assassin's Creed, that fought in the Second and Third Crusade, mentioned before. The Order of the Dragon was effectively a boys' club of monarchs and knights that had some battles won, but nowhere near the influence of the Templars. The dragon also started to decline and eventually disappear not long after its founder's death. Vlad II liked the name, so his son, Vlad III, whom was a lesser member of the order, took the name Dracula, meaning son of the dragon. Vlad liked the name so much, he signed his name on royal decrees at times as Dracula. Wilkinson in his book also makes a couple other mistakes, like naming Vlad II's successor Dan instead of his name Vladislav II. I would say it's fine because this story already has so many Vlads in it, but as mentioned before, the name Vlad doesn't appear in Wilkinson's book at all, so he has no excuse. Also calling Vlad III's brother Bladis instead of Radu the Handsome, which, I don't know, I guess he's pretty good looking, but so good looking that became his name? I don't know.
To make a long story short, yes, the book directly says that this Dracula is in fact the same Dracula that is our Vlad the Impaler. But if you ask Bram Stoker if Dracula was based on him, he'd probably say something like Vlad the Who, because he, like Wilkinson and, well, Vlad himself, just really, really, really liked the name Dracula.
And I agree, because Dracula is such a better name than Stoker's original name for his vampire, Count Wampire. So while the book does have a little origin for Dracula sprinkled throughout the novel of a noble ruler defending his homeland being usurped by his brother and goes into hiding only to come back 400 years later as a blood-sucking monster through devil worship, the movie decides to have a story of a lost love and defiance of God as his supervillain origin story. Cut to late Victorian era London, we're introduced to Jonathan Harker, played by Keanu Reeves, as a totally real native Englishman, you guys.
If I may inquire.
We all love Keanu. He seems like a very down-to-earth guy who's just super chill about everything. But this accent is really rough, like a surfer dude Londoner. But it's kind of charming at the same time, like an amateur Southern California improv group that's just trying his best. The thing is though, is that if he acted with an American accent, this would have been a near-perfect Harker. In the book, Harker is a very calm, stuffy English gentleman who finds himself trapped in Dracula's castle. And while a whole sort of spooky things happen to him, he tries his best to hide his discomfort and just goes with the flow until he can vent in his diary about his true feelings. Until then, he takes almost all of his encounters through this section of the book and most of the movie with what looks like a sense of acceptance and aloofness.
Like, sure, like, whoa, okay, spooky couch driver doesn't say a word at all. I'll get in. Whoa, cool shadow puppet, Dracula. You gotta show me that sometime. Whoa, audacious vampire babes. Righteous.
Actually, since we're on the brides for a minute, one of the major differences throughout the movie versus the novel is the heightened sexuality of the vampires. In the book, vampires, at least the brides, were sexual creatures. Dracula himself being a huge hunk wasn't explored nearly as much. That was almost one of the first things changed. Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, and many other actors that played the Count talk about all the mail they've received over the years from female fans. In regards to the book, the brides, even while in their death slumber in their coffins, cause men to stay transfixed on their beauty. One of our vampire hunters finds the brides and theorizes this is how they're able to survive. The men who come to slay the monsters can't because they're just so hot. The movie kept this hypnotic sex appeal about the brides from the novel. Bram Stoker was a notorious prude when it came to sex. At least that is where the consensus lies with Stoker biographers. He had a wife, Florence, whom we know they had sex at least one time because they had a kid together. According to family members, that was it. It was a very sexless marriage. Stoker would later in 1908 write a pro-censorship essay for the magazine The 19th Century and After. In it, he argues it's our ethical duty to stamp out lewd and suggestive content, that the only emotions which in the long run do harm are those arising from sex impulses. And while he argues that this is an inherent evil in men, the fact is that women are the worst offenders in this form of breach of moral law.
Bram, just chill, okay? Oh, this explains so much.
There's a rumor that all this sexual repression talk stems from Bram catching syphilis from a prostitute. This rumor originates from a biography of Stoker written by his grandnephew Daniel Farson. But the thing Farson has to back up this claim is that a relative who met Stoker at the end of his life said that he was acting weird. And that's it. The rest of the Stoker, including the person he was using as his primary source for this rumor, threw an uproar, denouncing the book wholeheartedly. But in Dracula, the sexual nature of the brides are there. They crouch like an animal after Harker. Harker is entranced by how pretty they are, but oh, he totally doesn't want to do it, you guys. He totally is thinking of his fiancée, and oh no, it's just so sexy the way he wants to kiss their lips and get even more kisses from them. And yeah, that's pretty much it, just kisses.
Yeah, going back to the syphilis thing, like, what would Bram even do with a prostitute?
$2,000 just to kiss a feller.
Vampires in Dracula are sexual beings that seduce their victims into a false sense of security. But even by this time period, Dracula is a pretty tame book. Stoker was kind of like a Victorian Dean Koontz in that regard. But to be fair to Mr. Koontz, his book Demon Seed is so much raunchier than his Odd Thomas. Bram talks in that essay mentioned before about some of the raunchier stuff that was coming out of England. That would be a disgrace to any country even less civilized than our own. Bram, chill. I'm not saying he has a point, and I'm using a French example, comparing Dracula's Bride, Promises of Kisses versus Guillaume Alpaner's Memoirs of a Young Raquel. Well, I ripped off my nightshirt and straddled the lovely creature whose rhythmic movements set my pickle slapping back and forth against her belly.
Before you slap that pickle, slap that subscribe button.
What I'm trying to say is that it makes sense for this movie to heighten up the sex scenes to keep up with the times. After all, the 1990s idea of seductive, sexy vampires don't just give him kisses. No, we need nudity, moaning, and of course biting Jonathan's dick.
I'm not exaggerating. In the movie's novelization, it's confirmed that, yeah, they bit his penis.
While Harker is imprisoned in Dracula's castle, the movie switches over to Harker's fiancée, Mina Murray. The two of them shared some scenes that weren't in the book, where before Harker left for Transylvania, Mina is shown to be a bit more upfront to her affection with Jonathan, while Jonathan is his usual aloof self. This is such a far cry from Mina in the novel. I mentioned in the Universal Dracula video before, Mina in the novel is to Bram Stoker the perfect woman. She's virtuous, very smart and motivated. She's independent, up to date on all the latest technology at the time. She's even the one that compiles all the notes, diary entries, audio logs, and newspaper clippings that make up the book Dracula. In universe, the reader is reading Mina's accounts and transcriptions of the events that are happening. She even remembers all the train schedules of multiple countries, which comes in handy at the end when the heroes are hunting Dracula. She does all of this stuff in the novel for Jonathan. She learns the train schedule so Jonathan can travel quicker for work. She learns to use the typewriter so she could help Jonathan in his future career. She has all the hallmarks of the independent women's movement at the time period the book was written in, the New Women movement, but she stops to take a moment in the novel to go and talk down to those women. Mina in the novel is to be a perfect victim for all the male characters to come together to want to save when she is attacked by Dracula. The movie changes this to be a love affair with Dracula.
I have crossed oceans of time to find you.
Mina in the movie is revealed to be the reincarnated soul of Dracula's wife that committed suicide in the beginning, all added for the movie. Even before the reincarnated connection is made, Mina is shown to be a bit more excited about getting it in with Harker than Harker is to her. Book Mina would never have Kama Sutra drawings of Arabian Nights in her desk or have a love affair while Harker was away. This gives Mina a flaw and makes what was originally a gothic horror tale into a love triangle, and about our third man. Like the novel, Dracula first appears as an old man in the castle to Harker. There's good suggestion in the novel that the carriage driver in the beginning is also Dracula in disguise. In the book, he wears a fake beard and large hat to disguise himself. The movie opts for him to be supernatural, to not say anything at all, and we don't see his face. While the movie kept Dracula's hairy palms, his signature mustache from the novel only appears when he's very young. It's kinda crazy how in nearly every adaptation the first thing to go is the mustache. The tricks with the shadows is movie only as well. Like mentioned before, the book is a collection of diary entries, newspaper clippings, and audio logs of the main characters and some side ones, but Dracula, the literal title character, does not get a POV chapter. So every depiction of him is from what could be called unreliable narrators. What's more unreliable than from a bunch of characters that want to kill you? Mina, being the chronicler of the book, also having ulterior motives to hide some things from the finished draft, could bring this movie to a different light.
Having scenes like her ripping pages out of her diary mentioning her affair hints that what we're watching is the actual events of the book, and the book itself is a collaborative effort of a group of characters wanting to show themselves in the best light. And that makes sense since the events of the book do happen in the movie.
These go to 11.
Mina has a best friend in Lucy Westerna. In the book, the two of them have a very sweet and close relationship with each other, told through letters written back and forth between the two. The relationship they have would be found in 1,000,001 contemporary novels of the time at the book's publication. Lucy has found herself proposed by 3 men, and the whole thing plays as almost like a romantic comedy. Lucy just can't decide whom she wants. She confides with Mina, wishing if only she can marry all 3. That would fix this love square. But alas, only monsters like Dracula can go poly in this universe. Lucy is a bubbly, enthusiastic 19-year-old girl in the novel. The movie decides that means she's a big old sex pot and bisexual with Mina.
Which is actually historically accurate.
So in the 19th century America and Europe, there was this idea of the romantic friendship, where you and your buddy would live together, practice holding hands, kissing, write affectionate letters to each other, sleep in the same bed, with the expectation that you will eventually get married. To someone of the opposite sex, of course. This is the late 19th century after all. And it wasn't just ladies. Men had their bromances too, and Stoker, full-on dude bro in college, playing rugby, going to mad ragers. One story I found was everyone at a party getting so plastered, they puked all over the floor so they could make a vomit slide in the ballroom.
You are so hetero!
Bram took part in romantic friendships too, referring to his guy friends and writers he admired in very affectionate terms, much more so than letters to his wife Florence, as well as hanging out with his guy friends more so than at home with her. There's speculation that Stoker might have been secretly gay, and it may or may not be true. Nevertheless, I'm sure the lesbian kiss in the rain in this movie was less on historical accuracy and more so for titillation.
And speaking of titillation, furries, eat your heart out. Or your throat out. Eat something out. Wait a minute.
At this point in the movie, Dracula has been escorted to England by his servants in wooden crates filled with the dirt of his castle. Harker has been left a prisoner doomed to be killed by the brides in their kisses. In the book, Harker, realizing his fate at the hands of the brides, escapes before anything happens to him, in the same manner as in the movie. In both versions, there is some time where we don't know if he survived or not. In the meantime, Dracula kills off the crew of the Demeter slowly on its way to England. The Demeter crashes on shore, and the captain of the ship tied himself to the helm with a crucifix in his hands so he can steer the ship even in death. Lucy is sleepwalking every night during this time. In the book, Mina follows her one night to see a shadowy figure crouched over her, with a mysterious mark left on her neck. In the movie, we have this happening as well.
These go to 11.
Something to understand about this movie is that nearly everything in it has been done before, or is a homage to other Dracula adaptations. Even the Wolfman.
The Hamilton Dean stage production of Dracula that were making its rounds in New York in 1927 after a successful run in London went through some changes for the American stage. One was Dracula sporting a werewolf costume feeding on Lucy in the bedroom. There are no pictures of the werewolf costume, but a reviewer at the time described it as a sort of dinner clothes cut from what looked to be a polar bear rug. It did not last very long in future productions of the play. So yeah, werewolf Drac, it is a thing. So every night, Lucy is being fed on by Dracula, while the movie also has Dracula courting Mina on dates, taking her out to dinner, to the movies, showing off his pet wolf he domesticated using vampire magic.
It's not that impressive. I managed to do the same thing with some chicken nuggets.
Being fed by Dracula causes Lucy to fall ill, so she's looked over by Dr. Seward, owner of the sanatorium that is right next door to Dracula's new house in Purefleet, and one of Lucy's 3 suitors, the other 2 being Lord Godalming, Arthur Homeward, and Quincy Morris from Texas. In the novel, all three are best friends, exploring the world, going hunting, maybe not romantic friends, but it's possible given the time period. I mean, I can see Homewood and Quincy practice kissing. Quincy and Arthur don't change much between book and movie because they don't really have much character outside of their positions in life. Both are wealthy aristocrats, but Stoker never actually explains what it is they do. Dr. Seward becomes, for a time, the new main character, as he tries to figure out what is ailing Lucy while he runs a sanatorium, which the movie makes it out to be just a nightmare of a place. Dirty, terrifying, all while Seward is addicted to the drugs he prescribes like any good doctor of the Victorian era.
Which is all book accurate.
These go to 11.
In the book, when Lucy decides to marry Arthur instead of Seward, he contemplates to take chloral hydrate, a sedative to go to sleep. He decides against it, though it's clear that this is a habit. There's very little description in the novel about the conditions of a sanatorium, despite a large chunk of the story revolve inside of it. In the beginning of the 19th century, mental institutions were going through a reformation of focusing on community-based therapy. Patients would take part in group activities and be rewarded for good behavior with parties and such. But, as donations dried up, the populations of the institutions grow. By the time Dracula the novel was published, asylums deteriorated back to padded cells, straitjackets, orderlies using billy clubs, and chains to restrain patients. In the words of one inspector at Hanwell Asylum in 1897, gloomy corridors and wards, absence of decoration, brightness and general smartness, a want of sufficient ventilation. It would be astonishing to find that any cures are ever made here. Hanwell was in West London, while Seward's asylum and Dracula's new home were in Purefleet at the border of East London. Both places at the turn of the century were home to the clothing and wholesale industry, the lowest paid in the city. These were the slums, while the more wealthy lived in the middle of the city, almost literally walled off by the stark difference in the socioeconomic classes. The only hint of the book that mentions the Seward's asylum is a comparison he makes, watching the beautiful sunset over London, saying his cold stone building is a wealth of breathing misery that he has to endure. That does not paint a fun place to be. As Lucy's health diminishes, Seward calls for help from his old mentor, Dr. Abraham Van Helsing. What is he a doctorate in? Well, in the book, it's so many that in his letters transcribed in the novels, he has to literally write etc. in his headers. He's a medical doctor, a doctor of literature, and even revealed later to be a lawyer. He's the mentor. He comes in while he doesn't know everything all at once. The novel has him go back and forth for research. He's the one that comes to that conclusion that they're dealing with something supernatural and makes Seward figure it out, telling him about how not everything in the world can be found in the medical textbooks. Over the years, adaptations have given Helsing more and more importance in their retellings of the book, even going so far as making him a monster hunter for the Catholic Church in one movie. Bram was a Protestant, so he would have loved that. This movie has it both ways, where he is still the mentor that comes in to help, but now he has superpowers.
Do you not think there are things in this universe which you cannot understand and which are true? Mesmerism, hypnotism, electromagnetic fields, materialization, astral bodies.
That teleportation never happens again in the movie. Movie Van Helsing is like every other aspect adapted from the book. The same, just more. The two look over Lucy. While the book has a vampire victim's teeth appear sharpened, the movie decides to go with this body horror motif where new teeth appear to actually be pushing out by force. It's a little detail like that that shows that transforming into a vampire looks just painful. Trying to save Lucy by blood transfusion, garlic, and crosses is a long process in the book. One day she's better, the next night someone removes the garlic or crosses out of ignorance. Next night, she's worse for wears, as if someone or something is draining the blood from her every night. The book plays up this mystery of what exactly is happening to Lucy. What was that mysterious bat outside her window? Bram Stoker didn't invent vampires, there were stories written before Dracula, but they were nowhere near as well known as they are today. So like every adaptation since all the way back to Nosferatu in the 1920s, the mystery of wondering what a vampire is one of the first things to go away. We, the audience, already know, and while Stoker does a good job having the readers feel the struggle of these guys trying their best to save their friend, There are moments in this section of the book that do meander a bit, especially when Helsing keeps leaving to go back to his lab out of the country, only to come back the next day at least 3 times in this part of the novel. The movie speeds these parts up, but still has the blood transfusion scenes in them. It seems old-fashioned to us, but blood transfusion was a newer concept of the time. Blood types weren't known yet, so modern readers will look at this with skepticism. But I like to think, like how some other vampire novels have done, shown that once bit, your blood type changes to AB, so you can take multiple different types. In the end though, Lucy does die, and is sent to a mausoleum, where Van Helsing has to convince his group of hunters not only the existence of vampires, but Lucy has become one and has been feeding on the children in the area. The novel has Helsing first bring only Seward to convince him, showing the empty coffin. Then brings the rest of the crew to confront Vampire Lucy, where she is slain, and now that everyone is up to speed, need to take down Dracula, whom in the movie has been just having an ugly, ugly breakup when Mina found out Harker is alive, and she rushes to him, not before ripping out pages of her diary mentioning her affair. Harker and Mina get married and return to England, so now all the characters are together. They're up to speed on who and what Dracula is and come up with a plan to stop him. Like the scenes with trying to save Lucy, the planning and plotting on stopping Dracula in the novel is a long one, with confrontations at first in this house in Purefleet of an army of rats he controls, then to the other properties. But Dracula is doing his own sneaking and plotting. In the book, vampires need to be invited in, and Seward's asylum is the team's base of operations.
This is where Dracula the book's view on people with mental illness gets a little... yeah.
In both book and movie there is Renfield. In the movie, Renfield was the original solicitor that went to Dracula to complete the property purchase. He came back instead as a rambling madman that eats insects and tries to attack Seward. This is an extension of Renfield's role in the Hamilton Dean Dracula play, and by extension the Universal version from the 30s. Where it was Renfield, not Harker, that visited Dracula in his castle, where later on Dracula puts him under a spell where he loses all agency and becomes an obedient servant. But in the book, Renfield is a random patient at the asylum that has no previous relationship to Dracula, but he's susceptible to Dracula's influence nonetheless. Seward, throughout the novel, doesn't really seek to treat Renfield, just play around with his condition and seeing where it goes. Renfield seeks to eat bugs and later birds for their life force. Seward calls Renfield his pet in his diaries. In the book, Dracula is invited into the asylum by Renfield. He is living there, it counts. Renfield learns Dracula is there to attack perfect, innocent Mina. Renfield is then attacked by Dracula when he served his purpose letting him in and hoping to stop him from attacking Mina. But since the movie humanizes Dracula, making Mina have feelings for him, this changes to a jealous Renfield attacked instead. In the movie, he is killed off in this scene, while book Renfield is left alive, barely, for our heroes to find.
This movie is a bit of a hot mess. I kinda like it.
Like, here you have a movie that is both a recreation of the book Dracula, but also recreating past versions of the characters that we associate with Dracula because of how many times the characters have appeared that we've seen before. Humanizing the monster Dracula, giving him a backstory filled with tragedy, is such a polar opposite of what the character is in the book, that by the time we get to the ending of the movie, what the hell is even happening? Is Mina in love with him, or is it her soul reincarnated causing her to feel this way? Harker, who went from aloof and easygoing about everything in the beginning to vampire hunter, now is back to watching and accepting his new wife, choosing the monster that killed her best friend over him. Making Mina both her book counterpart and part of a love triangle makes the ending feel unsatisfied, like the writers are left with not knowing how to actually end this story when book and movie collide, with the scenes in the Carpathian Mountains back at Dracula's castle. Dracula in the book is not a deep, sympathetic human character. Despite being the title character, he was never given a voice in Stoker's book. No POV chapter of his own. Using just the book as guidance, Dracula is a mustache-twirling villain, a monster from some faraway place many people never heard of, master of all sorts of scary creatures, wolves, rats, and lunatics. Dracula, this foreign blood-sucking monster from East Eurasia infiltrating what many Londoners thought at the time was the hub of the civilized world. That can be scary, but he's over in the slums of East London, so there's some safety if you live in the center of the city. Oh, until later on in the book, we see that he's buying property all over, including Piccadilly, a 10-minute walk from Buckingham Palace where the Queen lives. There's a scene in the Piccadilly house in the book where Dracula is ambushed by the vampire hunters. They broke into the house to spring a trap on him. It's a pretty silly scene, watching our idea of Dracula being this suave, scheming, aristocratic guy, diving out of the way of knife swings and such, watching him scramble to grab his money and titles, running out of the house not before making a big comic book villain pronouncement.
You shall be sorry yet. You think you have left me without a place to rest, but I have more. My revenge has just begun. Your girls that you all love are mine already, and through them and others shall yet be mine. My creatures do my bidding, to be my jackals when I want to feed. Bah! He actually says bah in the book. I didn't add that. I think this is the most Dracula has spoke in the book after coming to London. No wonder he's side by side with Frankenstein's monster a lot. I mean, those two are just a bunch of drama queens.
Happiness and affection are turned into bitter and loathing despair. In what should I seek for sympathy?
That's the fun thing about Dracula and vampires in general. They are a very versatile monster. And while my personal monster tier list has zombies and werewolves before vampires, I can't deny how flexible the monster's metaphor is for vampires. Going back to the Piccadilly scene, the hunters break into Dracula's house with the help of Arthur Homeworld, using his money and his title as a lord to hire a locksmith, and when a cop came over to see what was happening, he offered to help Arthur, again, break into a house that wasn't his without any proof of ownership because of his position in society. This is our hero. At least Dracula needs permission to come into my apartment. A century later, the first Blade movie does the opposite, having cops work for the vampires. And 150 years before Dracula was published, philosopher Voltaire said that the only real vampires are those living in France and England, stock jobbers, brokers, and men of business who suck the blood of the people in broad daylight. Dracula in the book, as a fear of the foreign invader, is an old fear. Harker in the beginning, as he's coming up towards Dracula's castle, looks down on the Eastern Europeans he sees. Strangely, this sentiment is still resonated with after the Brexit vote. The UK saw an increase in Polish hate crimes of all things.
Maybe that's one of the reasons why Dracula became more human as adaptations have come along. We love a relatable villain. That comes with the novelization to this movie. Fred Saberhagen's, Francis Ford Coppola's, John V. Hart's, Bram Stoker, you get the joke.
There's some fun bits in this book. It's a novelization of the movie with added elements from the original novel as well. We learn that Mina and Dracula get it on in bed before having Mina suck Drac's blood. We learn that Van Helsing, super smart, superhuman as he is, also knows about Mina's affair at the get-go. And the brides bit Harker's dick, leaving marks. Fred Saberhagen was hired to write the novelization after the success of his Dracula tape series, where Dracula speaks into a tape recorder about his side of the story. I was going to make a joke about how this was a rip-off concept taken from Anne Rice's interview with the vampire, but Dracula's tape came out 1 year earlier.
And that's all I wanted to talk about with Dracula, really. I mean, it was a lot, but there's so much more to discuss. If I missed anything, or you want to talk about something specific that wasn't in the video, or was in the video, leave a comment below. I still look over my comments in my older videos. I love to discuss this stuff. Now, I ended my Frankenstein videos with a look at Frankenstein Unbound, a movie based on a book that really was just so out there, and due to the format of my videos, I wasn't really able to discuss just really how bonkers it really was. It's just a shame that there wasn't a sequel. What was that? Oh no. Oh no, Brian Alice, what did you do?
This is CB Smith, and thanks for taking a page. Whew boy, that was a big one. This was a large project, and I appreciate everyone for sticking around and being so patient with me, especially the ones who financially support me over on my Patreon. This is a small channel. I'm not large enough to run ads, so everyone listed in the credits have been kind enough to help fund this channel for books and materials for research. For this video in particular, trying to find history books and novels, some nearly 200 years old, it wasn't the easiest. For just $2 a month, they get early access to my videos, automatic entrance into book giveaways, and some behind the scenes on future projects. And while I love the support on Patreon, I do always appreciate your likes and subscriptions on this channel. I hope everyone had a happy new year, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you all in the next video.